Hey friends, it's Carl here with another Calm Survival, and I've got a few things to show you. It's going to be a couple of videos, and we're looking at Swiss Army knives. Now, I pretty well only own Victorinox Swiss Army knives, but we can use pretty much any of these to be representative of the other brands that are out there. They're all going to have their own little sort of quirks or different sort of characteristics. And in general, you're going to find that, as I've said before, if you're trying to find the super cheapest ones or a deal is too good to be true, you're not going to be very happy. Or you might be spending a really high dollar amount and that company may not be providing you the same value. It can be really hard to tell because there are certain factors, especially with these Swiss Army knives, that kind of make them cheaper than almost anybody else can produce them. So that makes it a bit of a challenge. But let's just do a quick overview. Now, I don't have every size, but the biggest are referred to as the 111 millimeter size. So this is sort of the form factor that they come in. This has the sliding lock version, which I think are becoming harder and harder to find. Some of them have a liner lock. And this is the size of the current new Swiss Army knife, as in the actual Swiss Army soldier, the issued knife. Now, this one is called the rucksack. It's a little bit different than the regular soldier, but just for representation of the size. Then we have the 93 millimeter, and the 93 millimeter knives all have aluminum sides, so you don't get the toothpick and the tweezers, but you get a very robust, and sturdy scale of the knife, and the main blades are just a little bit thicker than they are on the other ones. Then we have the 91 millimeter, and so this is probably the most common form factor of the bigger ones. And I don't have any small, like the Victorinox Classic, but they can be pretty handy if you just need a pair of scissors or something like that. There's a lot of different varieties, and they kind of break down in a few different ways. So the first way to determine what you're looking at is how many layers it's got. So that's going to tell you a little bit about how, comparing one to another, how it might carry in your pocket, because they're all pretty standard. So this is a Huntsman model. It's a four-layer knife. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so compared to this Explorer, which is also a 4-layer, they're almost the same width. The Explorer is a little bit thicker because this center layer is thicker, but it's marginal. It's not by much at all. And then we can kind of build a family tree. So you'll find that a lot have either the corkscrew or a Phillips head screwdriver in this position here. It just happens to be, because of the way these work, they're really pretty modular, but it means that certain things go together. So we have our corkscrew, and it sits opposite the side that has the blades. Then we typically will have the option of either having the small penknife blade, which is my preference, or a kind of nail file nail cleaner. And then obviously the big blade. So that's already a couple of different variations that are all available. Then you'll have, you might have a wood saw, or you might have a pair of scissors. On the Huntsman, you get both. But if you wanted to drop a layer, well, if you want to have just scissors, you can get a Swiss Army knife without the saw. Or, same, if you just want a saw. And typically, you have the bottle opener and can opener sitting side by side. When it comes to the 93mm, there's not as many models on the market. And this, as I've shown before, is the Pioneer X, because it has the scissors. This one is the Farmer, which has the saw instead. And very recently, they released a Farmer X. So it has the saw and the scissors, but is a little bit thicker. Again, you can quickly see how you really can pick the one you want. There's also another variation, and that's in the scales. So especially in the 91mm, we have this shiny material, which is a celluloid plastic. So it's usually referred to as Cellador. And it's not super chemical resistant. So things like acetone nail polish remover will dissolve it a bit. You can actually use that to polish them up, but they're not very solvent resistant. And you have your typical tweezers and toothpick. There's also the Plus version, which you can get pretty much on any Swiss Army knife, and that gets you the little space for your pen. And it also adds a little hole for a straight pin. Within the last 10 or 12 years or so, most new production Swiss Army knives do actually have that hole for that straight pin, even if they don't have the space for the pen. So it's always worth checking, because it might be there, and you might be able to just easily carry a little straight pin, which is always handy. The rougher looking plastic is nylon, so it's a little bit more chemically resistant. Some people prefer the look, some people don't. And then we get into custom scales. So there are several companies that make custom scales. These are all very easily replaced. They pretty much just snap fit on. But you can get different materials. Like this one. Looks really nice. These are solid copper. Now, if you are into the everyday carry kind of realm, you know that copper is a pretty popular material, but you probably know how heavy it really is. Just to give a bit of an example, these two knives are functionally equivalent. Okay, they're both Victorinox compact models. The regular one, 65.2 grams. The copper one, 122.5 grams. In fact, it's heavier than this big 111, which for urban carry in your pocket, it's not so bad. It's definitely got some heft to it. Feels just fine. But for ultralight backpacking, not so great. Now you can also get them in materials like micarta, G10, wood, all kinds of stuff. But just think about what material properties might not be quite as apparent initially. One of the downsides to metallic scales like this is that the plastic scales are molded on the inside to have little nubs for retaining all of your little tools. However, the copper ones and like the titanium ones and things like that don't really have that, which means you need to have a bit more tension. And so you can definitely feel that it is a little bit more difficult. And sometimes you actually have to open them up, get some sandpaper in there to get them to hold things in, or if you loosen them up too much, it just won't fit. In fact, in this one, I have to have a little bend in my straight pin because otherwise it just falls straight back out of its little hole. It doesn't have anything to hold it in unless it becomes its own spring. So definitely decorative, but you know, sometimes we're allowed to be a little bit fancy. With the corkscrew, if you want to have that little screwdriver, which is kind of why I like the corkscrew ones, you can just get those. The important reason to know this is that if you go to, you know, a secondhand store or anything like that, you might find a cheap, used, beaten up Swiss Army knife. Well, we've already said that the blades are pretty soft steel, so they're pretty easy to sharpen, so they can be handy as a learning tool. But also, all those other parts are just an eBay search away. New scales, new toothpicks, new tweezers, springs, split rings, all that stuff is pretty easy to get. So, worth looking into if you're at all interested. Well, thanks for hanging out. I'll catch you guys next time.